Thunder crackled across the Montana sky as James Harrison trudged through the rain-soaked forest, his medical kit bouncing against his hip with each step. 3 years after leaving the military medical corps, he still couldn't shake the habit of carrying emergency supplies on his evening hikes. The storm had caught him off guard, turning the usual peaceful sunset walk into a treacherous journey back to his cabin. A brilliant flash of purple-white light split the sky, followed by what he first thought was thunder, but the sound was wrong. Instead of a rolling boom, this was a shrieking, tearing noise that set his teeth on edge. Something massive crashed through the forest canopy half a mile ahead, the impact sending birds scattering into the stormy sky. James's combat instincts kicked in. He moved quickly but cautiously toward the crash site, using the rain and darkness as cover. The smell of ozone and heated metal grew stronger as he approached, mixing with an odd, sweet scent he'd never encountered before. What he found in the small impact crater stopped him dead in his tracks. Amidst twisted, silvery metal that looked like no aircraft he'd ever seen lay a woman, if you could call her that. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent sheen, shifting between deep violet and pale gold. Delicate, fin-like structures ran along her forearms and the sides of her face, pulsing weakly with bioluminescence. She was clearly badly injured, dark indigo fluid seeping from multiple wounds. For a moment, James stood frozen, his training warring with his disbelief. Then the alien woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that swirled like nebulae. She reached toward him with a trembling hand, and James's medical training took over. Alien or not, she was a patient in need. "I'm here to help," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "I'm a medic." He opened his kit, grateful now for his over-preparation. The alien woman watched him with those cosmic eyes, her breathing shallow and ragged. To his surprise, she spoke, not in any language he recognized, but her tone was clearly one of pain and fear. Her translator, a small device at her throat, sparked and fizzled uselessly, damaged in the crash. James worked quickly, using his combat medical experience to assess and treat what injuries he could understand. Some of her anatomy was familiar enough. She had a circulatory system, though her blood was indigo rather than red. Other aspects were completely alien, but he focused on stopping the bleeding and stabilizing what appeared to be broken bones. The storm raged on as he worked, but James barely noticed the rain and thunder. He was completely focused on his patient, who remained conscious but weak. When he had done all he could in the field, he knew he couldn't leave her here. The crash site would draw attention soon, and she needed proper medical care. "I have a cabin," he said, knowing she probably couldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. "Safe place. Help you heal." He mimicked sleeping and pointed in the direction of his home. The alien woman studied his face intently, those remarkable eyes seeming to peer into his soul. Finally, she nodded slowly. When James carefully lifted her, she was surprisingly light, her body temperature several degrees cooler than a human's. The journey back to his cabin was arduous. James picked his way carefully through the darkened forest, protecting his precious cargo from the rough terrain. The alien woman drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring in her musical language or gripping his shirt when pain racked her body. Finally, the lights of his isolated cabin appeared through the trees. James had chosen this location for its privacy, wanting to escape the memories of war and the pressures of civilization. Now that same isolation would help him protect this extraordinary being who had literally fallen into his life. As he carried her across his threshold, the alien woman's eyes opened again. She touched his cheek with cool fingers, leaving a slight tingling sensation in their wake. Then she spoke a single word in English, clearly learned from his repeated use during her treatment. Safe. Yes, James replied firmly, surprised by the fierce protectiveness he already felt. You're safe now, I promise. He had no way of knowing that this promise would change not only his life, but potentially the fate of two worlds. As he settled her onto his bed and began proper medical treatment, James Harrison, former combat medic and self-imposed hermit, had no idea he had just taken the first step on an extraordinary journey that would test everything he believed about life, love, and the universe itself. Thunder continued to roll across the Montana sky, but within the cabin's warm confines, an impossible connection was beginning to form between two. Days passed like water through James's fingers as he cared for his otherworldly patient. The alien woman, who eventually managed to communicate that her name was Venna, proved to be as fascinating as she was mysterious. Her wounds healed at a remarkable rate, the torn flesh knitting itself together with an iridescent sheen that reminded James of mother of pearl. The breakthrough in their communication came on the fourth day. Venna had been studying James's old tablet intently, her fingers dancing across the screen with impossible speed. That evening, her damaged translator suddenly hummed to life, though the sound it produced was unlike its original voice. I have adapted your device's programming protocols, she said, her voice carrying an ethereal musical quality even through the electronic translation. Your language patterns are surprisingly elegant. James nearly dropped the herbal tea he'd been brewing. You fixed your translator using my tablet. Not fixed. Rebuilt. Your technology is primitive but adaptable. There was no condescension in her tone, only a gentle amusement. Like your medical techniques, crude but effective. I would have died without your intervention. James sat beside her on the couch, trying not to stare at the way her skin rippled with colors that seemed to match her emotions, currently a warm golden hue. Can you tell me what happened? Why you crashed? Venna's colors shifted to deeper, cooler tones. I was a researcher, studying developing civilizations. My ship was attacked by those who disagree with our methods of observation. She touched one of her healing wounds absently. They believe emerging worlds should be left completely isolated. I barely escaped, but my ship's core was damaged. Earth was the only habitable planet within range. There are others out there, other aliens watching us. Many, her nebula eyes met his. Some benevolent, some not. My people believe in careful observation and selective assistance. We help guide civilizations away from self-destruction when possible. She hesitated. Though I must admit, my fascination with humanity has always been more personal than scientific. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopters. James moved quickly to the window, his heart sinking as he saw searchlights sweeping the forest in the distance. They're looking for your crash site, he said grimly, and they're getting closer. Venna tried to stand but stumbled, still weak from her injuries. James caught her instinctively, and for a moment they stood frozen, her cool skin pressed against his chest, her fin-like structures flickering with pale blue light. You should turn me in, she whispered. Your government would reward you, and harboring me could be considered treason. James shook his head firmly. I didn't save you just to hand you over to be dissected in some lab. But we need to move. This cabin isn't safe anymore. He'd been preparing for this possibility, packing essential supplies and medical equipment. I have a friend's hunting lodge in the Bitterroot Mountains. It's completely off-grid. Venna studied him with those cosmic eyes. Why risk everything for me? You know nothing about my kind. I know you're a person who needed help, James replied simply. Everything else is just details. As they packed in hurried silence, Venna's translator picked up a transmission from the search teams. They were methodically sweeping the forest, using advanced detection equipment. They'd be at the cabin by dawn. James led Venna to his garage, where an old 4x4 waited, already loaded with emergency supplies. As he helped her into the passenger seat, she caught his hand. Her skin had taken on a deep, rich purple hue that he hadn't seen before. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. "The ones who attacked me, they followed me here. And they're not just after me anymore. They've seen how you helped me, protected me. On my world, there's a concept called soul binding, when two beings from different worlds form a connection that transcends species. It's considered dangerous, forbidden." James stared at her, the implications slowly sinking in. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying we're both in danger now." And her colors shifted again, rippling like the aurora borealis. "I'm saying I don't regret it." The sound of helicopters grew closer as James started the engine. As they pulled away from the cabin that had been his sanctuary, he realized he didn't regret it either. Whatever this connection was between them, this impossible, dangerous thing, it felt more real than anything he'd experienced since returning from war. They drove into the darkness with the first hints of dawn touching the eastern sky, leaving behind the life James had built and heading toward an uncertain future. In the passenger seat, Venna's bioluminescence pulsed softly. Synchronized somehow with James's heartbeat. Neither of them spoke, but in the silence, something profound was growing, something that would soon shake the foundations of two worlds. Behind them, the helicopters descended on the empty cabin, and somewhere far above, unseen ships moved in the night sky, drawn by a connection that defied the laws of both their species. The hunting lodge crouched like a shadow against the mountainside, its weathered logs blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. After 3 days of careful travel through back roads and wilderness, James and Venna had finally reached their temporary sanctuary. But safety, they would soon learn, was a relative term. Earth winters are intense, Venna observed, watching snow spiral past the frost-covered windows. Her natural bioluminescence cast shifting patterns on the wooden walls as she huddled closer to the fireplace. "My world has no seasons. The binary stars keep our climate constant." James added another log to the fire, stealing a glance at his companion. In the dancing firelight, her opalescent skin shimmered with deep blues and purples, and her fin-like structures had folded close to her body for warmth. Despite their dire situation, he found himself increasingly captivated by these alien yet graceful details. "Binary stars?" he asked, trying to keep her talking. Her voice, even through the translator, had become a comfort in their isolation. "Tell me about your world." Venna's colors shifted to a nostalgic gold. Kalara, a world of endless twilight and crystal forests. Our cities float in the upper atmosphere, drawing energy from the stellar winds. Her expression grew distant. "But it's also a world of rigid traditions and ancient laws. Laws I've broken by forming this connection with you." Before James could respond, all of Venna's bioluminescent markings suddenly flared bright red. She stood, moving to the window with an urgency that made his combat instincts fire. "They're here," she whispered. James killed the lights and fire in practiced motions, plunging the lodge into darkness broken only by Venna's dimming glow. Through the swirling snow, he could make out shapes moving among the trees, tall, angular figures that seemed to shift in and out of visibility. "Shade hunters," Venna explained, her voice tight with fear. elite trackers from my world. They're trained to eliminate any evidence of our existence from developing planets." She turned to James, her cosmic eyes wide. "Including witnesses." "How did they find us?" "The soul binding. It creates a unique energy signature, one they can track." Her colors rippled with guilt. "I should have told you sooner. By helping me, by forming this connection, you've become part of something ancient and forbidden. My people believe that cross-species bonds corrupt the natural order of evolution." A high-pitched whine filled the air, and James recognized the sound of advanced energy weapons powering up. "We need to move. Now." He grabbed their emergency packs, already prepared for this possibility. "There's a network of caves behind the lodge. I used to explore them during hunting seasons." They slipped out the back door into the howling storm. The snow provided some cover, but James knew the shade hunters' advanced technology would soon detect their heat signatures. As they reached the cave entrance, a blast of energy scorched the ground where they had stood moments before. Inside the cave system, James led them through twisting passages, grateful for his memory of the layout. Behind them, otherworldly voices echoed off the stone walls, speaking in a language that made his skin crawl. Venna's translator picked up fragments. "The binding must be severed. Cleans this world of the corruption. No escape from the ancient laws." They emerged into a large cavern where underground hot springs created a warm, misty environment. James pulled Venna behind a formation of rocks as heavy footsteps approached. In the dim light from her bioluminescence, now turned to a deep, warning red, he could see fear and determination warring on her alien features. "James," she whispered, "there's something else you need to know. The real reason I came to Earth." She took his hand, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images, vast fleets of ships hiding in the dark spaces between planets, armies of shade hunters preparing for a massive purge, thousands of worlds marked for cleansing of any cross-species connections. "My research wasn't just about observation," Venna continued. "I was looking for proof that these connections, these soul bindings, aren't a corruption but an evolution, a bridge between species that could lead to something greater. And what's happening between us?" Her colors shifted to a deep, pulsing purple. "It's stronger than any binding ever recorded." The footsteps grew closer, and James could see the shadows of their pursuers cast against the cavern walls by some unseen light source. He squeezed Venna's hand, feeling that impossible connection between them surge stronger. "Then let's prove them wrong," he whispered back. "Together." Venna's eyes widened as James pulled out his old service pistol. It seemed absurdly primitive compared to their pursuers' weapons, but he had one advantage: intimate knowledge of the cave system's weaknesses. "The hot springs have been carving out these caves for millennia," he explained quickly. "The ceiling in this chamber is unstable. If we can trigger a collapse." Venna's colors suddenly blazed with brilliant inspiration. She pulled out her damaged translator and began modifying it with impossible speed. "The device's power core, if we overload it near the weakest point." They shared a look of perfect understanding. In that moment, the connection between them felt like a physical force, a bridge across the vast gulf between their species. Whatever happened next, they both knew there was no turning back. The shade hunters entered the cavern, their angular forms seeming to absorb the mist around them. As James and Venna prepared to make their desperate play, neither of them could have imagined how their next actions would ripple across the galaxy, challenging the fundamental laws of two civilizations and proving that sometimes the greatest revolution begins with a single, impossible connection. The cave exploded into chaos as the overloaded translator detonated. James and Venna moved as one, their shared connection giving them an almost supernatural coordination. The blast sent shockwaves through the ancient limestone, and the cavern's ceiling began to crumble. The Shadehunters' angular forms blurred as they activated some kind of defensive shielding, but they hadn't anticipated the primitive effectiveness of falling rocks. Massive chunks of limestone crashed down, forcing them to retreat from the collapsing section of cave. Through here, James pulled Venna toward a narrow tunnel he knew led to higher ground. Behind them, inhuman shrieks of frustration echoed through the cave system as their pursuers realized their quarry was escaping. They emerged onto a snow-covered ledge halfway up the mountain. The storm had intensified, but Venna's bioluminescence cast enough light for them to find their footing. Her colors had shifted to an intense, electric blue that James had never seen before. That was incredibly primitive, she said, her translator struggling with the complex emotions in her voice, and absolutely brilliant. Her fin-like structures were rippling with excitement. Do you understand what we just proved? We acted in perfect synchronization. The soul binding is growing stronger. A blast of energy sizzled past them, melting the snow and reminding them they weren't safe yet. The Shadehunters were emerging from another cave entrance, their forms distorting the very air around them. Running would be pointless now, Venna said, her colors deepening to a resolute purple. We need to show them the truth. She reached for James's hand. Do you trust me? Completely, he replied without hesitation. The moment their hands touched, something extraordinary happened. Venna's bioluminescence spread to James's skin, creating patterns of light that mirrored her own. The connection between them, usually just a subtle awareness, exploded into full consciousness. Suddenly he could feel everything she felt, understand her language as if he'd spoken it all his life. The Shadehunters stopped their advance, their masked faces turning to each other in what James now recognized as shock. Through his link with Venna, he understood why. What they were witnessing should have been impossible. By the ancient laws, one of them spoke in their haunting language, which James could now understand. This abomination must be destroyed. Your ancient laws are based on fear, Venna responded, her voice carrying a new authority. Through their connection, James felt her drawing on his strength, his unwavering determination. What you call corruption, we call evolution. The soul binding isn't a mistake, it's the next step. The leader of the Shadehunters raised his weapon, but hesitated as the light patterns flowing between James and Venna grew brighter, forming complex geometric shapes in the air around them. The prophecy, another hunter whispered. The bridge between worlds. James suddenly understood. Through their shared consciousness, Venna showed him ancient texts, secret histories kept by her people. Stories of a time when species across the galaxy would learn to bridge their differences, when the boundaries between civilizations would fade in favor of something greater. Your own histories speak of this, James found himself saying, the words coming naturally in the Shadehunters' language. You're not here to enforce the law. You're here because you're afraid of change. The storm raged around them, but in their shared consciousness, James and Venna stood in perfect calm. The light patterns between them had become a complex dance of energy, forming symbols that even the Shadehunters recognized, the ancient prophecies made manifest. The leader lowered his weapon slowly. The council must be informed of this. The council already knows, Venna replied. Why do you think they sent their best researchers to study Earth? Humanity's capacity for adaptation, for accepting the unknown, it makes them perfect candidates for first contact. My crash wasn't an accident. It was a test. James felt the truth of her words through their connection. Everything, her crash, their meeting, even the chase, had been part of a greater plan. But the soul binding, the deep connection they'd formed, that had been real, unexpected, and more powerful than anyone had predicted. The shade hunters conferred among themselves in rapid musical tones. Through Venna's understanding, James followed their debate. Ancient laws versus undeniable evidence, tradition versus evolution. Finally, the leader turned back to them. "We will report what we have witnessed," he announced. "The council must decide the next step. But know this, others will come. Not all will be as flexible in their interpretation of the laws." As quickly as they had appeared, the shade hunters seemed to fold into themselves, their forms blurring until they vanished completely. The mountain storm began to ease, and the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. James and Venna stood in the snow, their shared bioluminescence slowly fading, but their connection stronger than ever. Through their link, he felt her relief, her joy, and something deeper, an emotion her people had no name for, but that humans called love. "What happens now?" he asked, though through their connection he already knew the answer. "Now," Venna replied, her colors shifting to a warm, deep gold, "we prepare. Earth needs to be ready for what's coming. And we need to find others like us, other soul-bound pairs who've been hiding. We're not alone, James. We never were." As the sun rose over the mountain, casting long shadows across the snow, they stood together on the precipice of a new era. Through their shared consciousness, they could feel the subtle vibrations of change beginning to ripple across the galaxy. The bridge between worlds had been built, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months after the confrontation on the mountain, James stood at the window of their new home. A secluded compound deep in the Pacific Northwest, funded by a secret coalition of humans and aliens who had long prepared for this moment. The morning mist curled through the ancient redwoods, reminding him of the crystal forests Venna had shown him through their shared consciousness. Venna approached from behind, her bioluminescence synchronizing with his heartbeat, as it always did now. She wore a modified version of her traditional researcher's garments, adapted to help her blend in during their increasingly frequent trips to nearby cities. Her fin-like structures now folded elegantly against her skin, and she had mastered the art of dimming her natural glow, though her opalescent skin still drew attention. "The council's representatives will arrive tonight," she said, wrapping her cool fingers around his warm ones. Through their bond, he felt her mix of excitement and apprehension. "They're bringing 17 other soul-bound pairs they found. Some have been hiding for decades." James nodded, processing the information flowing through their connection. And the opposition, growing more desperate. Venna's colors flickered with concern. The traditionalists are losing influence, but they're not giving up. 3 more attempts to cleanse soul-bound pairs were reported in the Andromeda sector last week, but they failed. Her colors brightened with pride. "The bonds are getting stronger. We're evolving faster than anyone predicted." Their shared consciousness filled with images from the underground network they'd helped build. A Japanese scientist and her crystalline partner from the Pleiades, working on revolutionary quantum technology, a Maasai elder sharing ancient wisdom with a being of pure energy, a young Australian artist whose paintings, inspired by her connection with a synaptic collective from deep space, were transforming human understanding of consciousness itself. "The old laws are crumbling," James mused, watching a hummingbird hover near the window, a sight that still filled Venna with wonder. But change never comes easy. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission from their allies in the council. The holographic display showed a vast chamber where representatives from thousands of worlds debated the future of interstellar relations. The traditionalists were losing ground, but their warnings of chaos and corruption still held sway in many sectors. Through their bond, James felt Venna's memories of growing up under those rigid laws, the weight of traditions that had calcified into dogma over millennia. But he also felt her fierce joy at breaking free, at discovering that true progress often meant challenging ancient certainties. "They're afraid," Venna said softly, her colors shifting to contemplative blues and purples. For so long, they believed isolation was the only way to preserve their cultures. They don't understand that real strength comes from connection, from growth, from change. James pulled her closer, their shared bioluminescence creating dancing patterns on the walls. "Show them," he whispered. "Show them what we've learned." Venna's eyes, those swirling cosmic pools, met his. Through their connection, they began weaving together everything they'd discovered about the true nature of soul binding. How it wasn't just a simple linking of minds, but a profound evolution of consciousness itself. When two different species formed this bond, they created something entirely new, a bridge not just between individuals, but between different ways of experiencing reality. Their shared consciousness reached out, connecting with the other soul-bound pairs across the planet and beyond. Each connection was unique, a new harmony in the growing symphony of interspecies consciousness. Through this expanding network, they could feel the foundations of the universe shifting, adjusting to accommodate this new form of existence. A sudden alert interrupted their communion. Their security systems had detected multiple incoming ships, not council vessels, but rather a last, desperate strike force of traditionalists, determined to end the corruption before it could spread further. But this time James and Venna didn't feel fear. Through their bond, they could sense the other soul-bound pairs converging, their combined consciousness creating a field of energy that the attackers' weapons couldn't penetrate. The very fabric of space-time seemed to ripple as thousands of years of separation between species began to heal. "They still don't understand," Venna said, her colors blazing with determination. "This was always meant to happen. Not conquest, not corruption, but convergence. A universe where differences become strengths, where isolation gives way to infinite connection." James felt the truth of her words resonating through their bond and beyond, touching minds and hearts across the cosmos. The attacking ships hung suspended in the atmosphere, their crews confronting the undeniable reality of what was unfolding. Through their shared consciousness, James and Venna broadcast a simple message to friends and foes alike. The boundaries between us were never meant to be permanent. We are the first notes of a new song, the first steps on an infinite journey. Join us. As the dawn light strengthened, painting the mist-shrouded forest in gold, they stood together, not just two beings from different worlds, but living proof that love could transcend the vast gulfs between stars. Through their connection, they felt the future unfolding, a galaxy awakening to new possibilities, ancient barriers falling away, and countless souls reaching across the darkness to find each other. The universe, they had discovered, wasn't meant to be a collection of isolated worlds maintaining careful distance. It was meant to be a web of connections, each unique bond adding its own harmony to the cosmic symphony. And they, through their impossible love, had helped strike the first note of this new music. "Ready?" Venna asked, her colors shifting to a